everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to have an important discussion about the need for an inspector general in Delaware. I'm John Kowalko. I'm the president of the Delaware Coalition for Open Government. More often we're known as DelCOG because it's a little bit easier to say. We've put in a lot of, it looks like, and Senator Sturgeon is actually showing us the bill, it looks like right there too, so very exciting. A lot of work went into creating this event. And so I really want to thank everyone that helped plan this, all the people who put in the time to, get this together. I also want to thank all of our sponsors. We're really happy to have so many different sponsors. Our sponsors show how broad this support is for an inspector general and also how needed it is, because our sponsors represent very different interests. And I think everyone, across Delaware understands how important this topic is and how important it is to have government oversight and accountability. So in addition to DelCOG, as well as the Delaware Press Association, the event is also sponsored by Common Cause Delaware, Delaware Poor People's Campaign, Delaware Public Preschool Coalition, the League of Women Voters of Newcastle County, Lead-Free Delaware, Metropolitan Urban League, the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, Network Delaware, the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists, and Rise Delaware, and that's Retirees Investing in Social Equity Delaware. So thank you to all of them, and I will mention all of them again at the end of our discussion. And when we send out something in about probably the next couple of days and the next week to give everyone access to the recording, we'll also mention all of these organizations as well and ways that you can connect with them and figure out, if you want to get more involved with the topics that they're dealing with, because all of these organizations deal with important topics. So people throughout Delaware understand that we need to hold our government accountable, that we need transparency, we need oversight. Most states in the country already have an inspector general, and indeed many people in Delaware that I've spoken to already think that we have an inspector general. So I think it's unfortunate that we don't have one. And indeed, Delaware is often ranked as one of the least transparent and least accountable states in the entire country. In 2015, there was an excellent report by the Center for Public Integrity that ranked Delaware the 48th worst state overall for accountability and transparency. And since that time, we have made little, if any, improvements to how our government operates. So I think the need for Delaware to have an inspector general is highlighted by repeated incidents in the states that we've had to deal with. We have somebody in here right now who's been organizing around the issue of lead in our public school drinking water. We have a reporter who deals with underserved communities. I mean, there are excellent examples that we're going to talk about for why we need to be looking at scandals and corruptions, including those by elected officials, that need to be investigated and where those results of those investigations need to be made public. The public should have an explanation when taxpayer money is being used to pay thousands or even millions of dollars in settlements. And even when mismanagement or some type of abuse or waste does not rise to the level of a crime, it should still be investigated, should still be corrected, and the public still should have a right to know about how that process took place. This type of accountability is possible with an inspector general, and this is why most places recognize the importance of having this type of office. We have people tonight here who have joined as attendees who are from all over the country. We have people from Florida, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Colorado, DC. We have one of our panelists is an inspector general from Louisiana, and he also has some national expertise as well as formerly as part of the associations of inspectors generals. So, I think we might as well get right into the discussion. First, I'm going to name all of our panelists, and then I'm going to give them all a brief opportunity to just, introduce yourself and say, a couple of words about why you think we need, what are the benefits of government oversight, and what would an inspector general, what would be the importance of having an inspector general in our state be? So our five panelists here tonight are the Louisiana Inspector General, Stephen Street, Delaware State Senator Laura Sturgeon, and she represents District 4. Delaware State Representative Mike Smith, and he represents District 22. The Underserved Communities reporter for Delaware Online, the News Journal, Anitra Johnson, and Lead-Free Delaware co-chair Sarah Bucic. Thank you all so much for being here. This is really a wonderful group of people. And I'm so excited to have this discussion. So starting with you, Mr. Street, could you please maybe briefly introduce yourself and your thoughts on the importance of oversight, especially Inspector General oversight?
I'm happy to do it, John. And this is something that I'm very, very passionate about. Throughout my entire career, I've been the Inspector General for the state of Louisiana for 15 years. Which is if you understand the politics of the state of Louisiana, you realize what a miracle that is, that I'm still in this job after all that amount of time. I can tell you that inspectors general are not only a good, valuable thing for any government anywhere, but really in a state like ours, and from listening to you guys and getting to know you over the last couple of years, Delaware is really no different. My experience has been that corruption exists everywhere that there is money, power, human beings, and the opportunity to do the wrong thing. Now, my state rightly gets made fun of because we've got a special reputation for public corruption that has been well earned over the really the centuries. But I have learned in traveling the United States and really going out of the country as well that that there's really not more corruption in other places than in my state of Louisiana. It's just that for the longest time, we here in Louisiana were so much prouder of it than everybody else. It seemed like we wore it on our sleeve, almost like a little with a little wink and a nod, you know. But I think that's changed pretty dramatically back in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina devastated the New Orleans area and really the entire Gulf Coast. Over 200,000 homes were destroyed between New Orleans and the Mississippi and Alabama coasts. And it was the worst, at the time, the worst natural disaster in history. And so we had hundreds of billions of dollars in federal aid flowing through here and experienced all of the fraud and corruption that went along with it. And I believe that was the time when the citizens of the state of Louisiana decided that they had had enough. And so even though we had this Inspector General's office that existed by executive order, the incoming governor following Katrina made it part of a platform to turn it into a true public corruption investigation agency with statutory authority, statutory law enforcement powers, and all of the things that go along with that. I know we've got a lot of great panelists here tonight. I want to give them an opportunity to chat, but I will be, I have lots to share and I'm happy to be participating in this very worthy exercise.
Thank you so much. And Senator Sturgeon, would you like to briefly introduce yourself and your initial thoughts on the topic?
So much for having me. I'm Laura Sturgeon, Wilmington, Brandywine 100 area, Greenville, Centerville, Hockessin, and parts of Pike Creek. I overlap. Who is my co-prime sponsor of this bill once we're ready to file it. I guess I got interested in this topic over the course of my now about 5 years in the legislature. There's been a few scandals that have hit, you know, that have hit some of our other elected offices in the executive branch. Then there's been some public education, and there's been some harassment allegations of different elected officials in other like executive riot questions around potential conflict types of jobs. Like it's difficult when that happens is we don't really have anyone to turn to who can investigate these things. to do our own investigations on top of everything else we're doing between constituent services and trying to work legislation. It's very difficult to, I don't know why you stopped my video co-host. Was it freezing or something? Oh, I'm
Yes.
breaking up.
Yeah, our admin may
Yeah.
have stopped your video because your voice is.
Because I was breaking up.
little.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, then, yeah, just keep me off camera if it helps. I have been getting this all day. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable. I don't know why. But anyway, bottom line, I'm interested in legislator. We do not have time to do in-depth investigation. And it would be nice to know that there is somewhere we can go with those concerns, that we can share what we're hearing. And if there seems to be a pattern, it can be investigated. So it doesn't fall on us to try to do these investigations, which is especially awkward if we're trying to investigate ourselves. So I'm just really interested in having a place that would help, an agency that will help restore the public trust. There's doubt about our trustworthiness that colleagues think sunlight is the best disinfectant. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good points as well. Representative Smith, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks so much, John, for having me on tonight. Good to see so many folks engaged on this topic. I've been really interested in really transparency legislation since I was elected. Not that I knew the COVID pandemic was going to happen, but one of the bills I pushed was so that we would have all of our committee hearings and floor procedures live streamed. And due to COVID, that became a thing, and we were able to do it anyway, which was great. Counteractively, I didn't realize, but last session, Representative John Kowalko at the time and myself were working on two different inspector general bills. So it's awesome when you have folks that are on the same page and they don't even realize it. So I was able to get with Representative Kowalko, and I had realized that you all had been working on, DelCOG had been working on this bill for quite some time. So bowed out from taking any more time on my end and wanted to put some help behind Representative Kowalko and his efforts. And then when I realized he was not running for office again, I did promise him that I would continue to try to make sure that we got this done for him in his absence. And then Senator Sturgeon and I overlap with each other. And I think it was great that we have the Senate and the House wanting to work on that. And I think that it being a Senate bill will be great because most of the senators from last time were on the bill and wanted to be involved. And that'll help that first layer of the process, I think, go by a little more smoothly while we continue to learn some of the arguments. So I'm very excited to be working with her on it and others. And I think it's just something we've desperately needed. I think there has not been that one-stop shop for waste, fraud, abuse, accountability, amongst other things. And I think the argument's been, well, that lies with the AG's office or that lies with the auditor's office. And I find this to be a very particular thing in between both of those that have, like any org chart, a lot of dotted lines in between on how they work together. And so from an independent standpoint, I thought this was the best way to go, and glad to see so many folks on the same page about it. So thanks again for having me.
Oh, thank you. And just so everyone knows, I am not Representative Kowalko. We share the same name. If you couldn't tell by the hair, I'm not the former representative. Although I do believe he is watching today. I'm Representative Kowalko's son. But yeah, and you know, and I'm really excited to have both Representative Smith and Senator Sturgeon here, because it shows that this is, you know, this is both houses, both parties, you know, this is a broad bipartisan support that this type of, you know, concept has to be enacted in Delaware. And so I'm really excited. Ms. Johnson, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Thank you, John, and thank you to the organizers for holding this very important public discussion. My name is Anitra Johnson. I am the Underserved Communities Reporter at Delaware Online, the News Journal. And I think that this topic is long overdue, having an Inspector General from the perspective of someone who grew up in Delaware, from the perspective of someone who is Black, from someone who is a mother. There are too many systems in place that are set up to confine, constrain, and to prohibit people from living the life that they choose to live within this society. And there are not enough answers as to why one group or another gets to prosper or engage or be heard. That being said, I feel like most people, including government officials, are uneducated or misinformed, or they just have an outright contempt for FOIA, freedom of information, or the concept of open government in general, which is unfortunate. And being a journalist, the stance makes it very difficult for us to perform the most basic aspects of our constitutional charge as government watchdogs, because Delaware has made it so difficult to access records and documentation that has been created by public bodies that are supported by taxpayer money, or records and documentation that's been created by a government representative who is responsible for upholding public integrity. I think that an Inspector General, another layer of public office that is charged with allowing access, public access and investigation into the actions and decision behind public entities is very important, and should also be taken in consideration for the economic and political climate that we're in today.
Thank you. Yes, those are very good points as well. Ms. Bucic, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting me here this evening. My name is Sarah Bucic, and I've been working as a volunteer citizen advocate on childhood lead poisoning prevention since summer of 2016, when lead paint chips landed in my yard and driveway and near my child from a water tower being sandblasted. And since that time, through our group, Lead Free Delaware, we have done a lot of work to correct oversights and errors in how childhood lead poisoning is managed in the state. Things began to get really contentious last September when we learned that a school was put on bottled water for lead, and parents and teachers were never notified. And through a series of dozens of FOIA requests, coalition building, and petitions, we've been able to get all the drinking water sources in every public school retested by the end of this school year. And the state has done almost 10,000 samples, which are now reported, and every single sample contains lead. And there's no safe level of lead in drinking water. And our coalition has really been doing the job of an Inspector General ourselves. We've done over 50 FOIA requests since the fall, and we are the ones investigating, cross-checking, and documenting the missteps and misstatements of our state. And we're absorbing the costs. You know, there's costs to FOIA at some point. And we're investing considerable amounts of time into the issue. And uncovering this kind of misdeed is what Inspector Generals can do for the people. So the problems are also continuing to unravel. At the same time, we're finding alarming levels of lead in our schools. The state has also maneuvered to remove school nurses from receiving required information about lead exposures when children are registering. And our school nurses are the most appropriate people in the school to help address the crisis of exposure to lead. So thanks so much for having me here tonight. I look forward to the discussion.
Yes, thank you. And you know, we have a lot of great perspectives here. We have a lot of different perspectives. And so I'm gonna, you know, we're gonna work our ways through everybody because I think what, you know, what Sarah and Anitra have just discussed is so important. And, you know, at some point, something has to be done in Delaware. And without transparency and oversight, it's hard to know what should be done and how it could be done. And so I want to start by going back to Stephen from the Louisiana. You know, I think you're in many ways a national expert on inspectors generals. And so I was wondering if you could sort of set the stage by talking a little bit about what role an inspector general plays in government oversight and accountability. And maybe if you have any salient examples of you know, what kind of success you have had in Louisiana.
Oh, sure. And I'll try to keep this brief, but let me say that the expertise that you refer to comes from the School of Hard Knocks. I will say that an inspector general, and especially in a state, you know, where that's been known for its public corruption, is not for the faint of heart. It is a job that requires a steely resolve and a determination to do the job. The expertise also comes from having had the privilege of serving as president of the National Association of Inspectors General for 8 years. I just rolled off in January, but that gave me the opportunity to travel the nation and to see. I will say this: that the issues in the IG community are the same everywhere you go. It doesn't matter where you go. There is natural pushback against oversight, and it's I call it Newton's third law. Or refer to that there's an equal and opposite reaction to effective oversight. And what you're seeking to avoid is the appearance of oversight, which is far worse than no oversight. You don't want a situation where there's an appearance that oversight is taking place, and that gives public officials and others who might not be doing the right thing an opportunity to kind of hide behind this you know, oversight that's not real and not substantive. So let me just say this about the state of Louisiana. My office was empowered in the wake of this massive public corruption scandal. We had the mayor of New Orleans ultimately went to jail, along with numerous city employees. Vendors that were doing business with the city went to prison. We had parish council members in various communities, all related basically to hurricane relief, fraud, and other sorts of government corruption. So the public support for the creation of the office was just off the charts. And so much so that it was almost impossible for anyone to oppose it. Now, having gotten into this gave us a unique opportunity to create the office in a way that makes it truly independent. And by that, I mean, there are statutory measures that provide political independence, and that is the most crucial thing that you can do. So I'll give you an example of a couple of the things that exist in Louisiana that that help to keep us non-political. The Inspector General is appointed by the governor of the state of Louisiana for a 6-year term. That 6-year term is important because it overlaps the 4-year term of the governor. So that means that every time there's a governor's election, there's not an automatic turnover, you know, with the Inspector General. Now, that appointment has to be confirmed by the Louisiana Senate. Once the IG is confirmed, they cannot be removed during their term without the governor's signature and a majority vote of both the House and Senate. And that seems like a lot of hoops to jump through to remove an IG, but let me tell you, you need that protection. I was told when I first took the job that I would need that protection, and I'm not sure I believed it at the time because we had the wind at our back with all this public support. But as soon as we really started diving into difficult investigations, we encountered the pushback from the Louisiana State Capitol, which is right out my window here. You can't see it, but the fact is there were 2 different efforts to try to completely eliminate my office by the legislature, which were directly related to investigations that we had underway. And so that protection was important. There are other protections, for instance, salary protection. You can't cut the IG salary down to a point that would make them leave the job. Funding, protecting funding is important, making sure that's been our weak spot down here, and I'm happy to talk about that later. We also have safeguards, and one of those would be, for instance, a person cannot have held a public or an elected office for a period of 2 years prior to becoming the Inspector General. What that does is it keeps either defeated politicians or term limited politicians from getting into a job like the Inspector General, perhaps with a list of scores to settle. So you want to give that two-year cleansing period to give the public confidence that the person that's in the job doesn't have improper motives. And on the other end of that, there's a 4-year cleansing period from the time the Inspector General leaves before they can qualify to run for a public office. That is so that people can be confident that we're not using this job as a stepping stone. Like, in other words, the investigations are not being done for political purposes. And so we've worked very hard down here. And over 15 years, I was appointed twice by a Republican, and the third time I was reappointed by a Democrat governor. And I'm in my third term. I have 3 years left on my third term. Now, John, you asked about successes, and we've had many of those. The most recent ones are criminal convictions and indictments and such. But I can also point to, for example, go to 2012, which is 7 years after Katrina. We had another hurricane that hit here, Hurricane Isaac. It was not devastating at anywhere near the level of Katrina, but it did a lot of damage. And our office released a report on our Homeland Security Department and the National Guard allowed $17 million worth of ice to melt in an unrefrigerated warehouse. And the ice that actually did make it to the public ended up costing $28 for every 10-pound bag. Now, when we put that report out there, that, as you might imagine, generated a lot of outrage and a lot of attention to detail to where we were able to generate some corrective measures to get that, so that nothing like that ever happened again. We also did things like finding out that the state was blowing millions on unused airline tickets for state travel. That's where if you book a reservation or you book a flight and you cancel it, you have a credit that's good for 1 year, and at the end of that year it expires. Well, we found well over $1 million in airline tickets that just went down the tubes, and that was the kind of thing we put measures in place. So when you identify waste at that level, it really, first of all, it angers the average citizen, as it should. Because none of us that are sitting around the kitchen table trying to figure out how to pay bills would allow that money to just evaporate into thin air. But we've also worked for a variety of areas in state government. We worked over a dozen successful cases inside the Department of Corrections, all against corrections officials that ended up going to prison. The prison warden and his wife went to the federal penitentiary, and a number of other DOC employees. Everything from embezzling public funds to civil rights violations, where they're beating up handcuffed and shackled inmates and then obstructing the investigations of those things. I don't know if Delaware has a film tax credit program, but we have one down here that's been pretty successful, but it's also been rife with a lot of fraud, and we worked about a dozen successful criminal cases inside that program. The latest things have been summer nutrition assistance programs that have come through the Department of Education. Very worthy programs that are designed to help kids when they're not in school. A lot of kids, the only nutritious meals they get are when they're in school, and so during the summer months, these programs help to feed these kids. And unfortunately, there were a lot of folks that chose to commit fraud and to the tune of millions of dollars. We've worked student loan and student college assistance fraud cases. Pretty much, and just official misconduct. We've worked all sorts of those cases and have now developed a reputation where all 3 United States attorneys work very closely with us. I've got agents embedded inside of the FBI offices, 2 of them in the state. So we have these task force arrangements. It took us a long time to get there, but I think we're now in a spot where people sort of trust that we're going to get to the truth, whatever it is, using any and all legal means at our disposal and ethical means at our disposal. Understanding the seriousness of the job that we do and how important it is to do it fairly and without bias and without political considerations. And let me say one more comment about Sarah, you brought up the FOIA. That's a hugely important tool for ordinary citizens to gain transparency in government. The IG does not have to rely on FOIA, and that's a good thing. If you create it correctly, then the IG will have subpoena power, and they'll have the ability to get to records in a much faster manner, and to be able to hold people accountable for what's going on. So it's obviously in the short venue or short time constraints that we have tonight. I can't go into the detail of every case, but I'm happy to talk about just the different challenges that we've overcome down here, and how excited we are, because we've helped communities all over the cities, states, and at the county level as well, create IGs around the country, and we're happy to weigh in and do what we can to help them do it right, because it will absolutely pay dividends for your state. There's no question about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think your response touched on so many topics. And I think for many of us who, have lived in Delaware, so much of what you talked about resonates with what's happening in Delaware as well, too. And it goes to what you said earlier about how these issues that inspector generals deal with are the same everywhere. At any time there's money involved, there's going to be, fraud involved. Anytime there's power involved, there's going to be corruption involved. And so you need a way to deal with that. I'm going to jump to Senator Sturgeon and Representative Smith next. And I'm going to actually start with Representative Smith, because I would like to get a sort of a sense of what an inspector general would look like in Delaware. But first, I'd like to ask Representative Smith, maybe if you could talk a little bit about what happened last year with HB 405, which was an excellent bill. That was the bill you mentioned earlier that you worked on with my father, Representative Kowalko. It was really an excellent bill. And a lot of the stuff that Mr. Street mentions was stuff that was in our bill. Some of those protections, to make sure that, Inspector General would be independent. And, I think we know that we had that need. And so what happened last year? What was the opposition? What was the result with that bill?
Sure. Yeah. So one, I did want to add, our bill would bar someone for 3 years for running for office or being the IG or being a cabinet secretary and all of those things. So we did add that, and several other provisions that you mentioned. A few nuances because of the Delaware Constitution versus Louisiana. But last year, it really, to be honest, it kind of got caught up because of the cost, right? So if you put a bill in, gets a fiscal note, then has to go to appropriations, and for all intents and purposes, it got stuck in appropriations. And that's going to happen for all of you. I would assume all of you know, because you're engaged in the process, but appropriations is made up of members from the Joint Finance Committee, and depending on the will of them and doing so, it gets stuck. Now, in fairness, had the governor's budget already been recommended, had Joint Finance already been going through markup and all those things, absolutely. I would make the argument when you have $1 billion surplus, though, that you have a little bit of flexibility in how you do some of that spending. I'm not going to overspeak for Senator Sturgeon because she's on Joint Finance, but I am on the bond bill committee, so I do rely on those funds so we can do a lot of the capital infrastructure projects. But I'm a very blunt person, as your father will tell you. So I'll just say, look, it got caught up in appropriations. we were given no wiggle room, and that's one of the main reasons why we want it to be a Senate bill this go around to, to kick it off on the right foot.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And so going over to Senator Sturgeon, what is an inspector general going to sort of look like in Delaware? What would be some of its key features? And do you know how much it would cost? I mean, I think right now what we have about a little bit over a $5 billion budget in Delaware, and so I would assume that the investment would be worth it. But what would that investment be for an inspector general?
Okay, but first I want to ask, if I start to break up again, will you guys give me a signal like a thumbs down? In fact, I might be breaking up now. I'm okay so far?
You sound good right now.
Okay. Okay, because if I do, I will just stop talking and you can call on other people and I'll just listen the rest of the time. Yeah, the fiscal note from the bill last year came through, and it would cost roughly $1 million a year to keep an inspector general's office up and running, with an inspector general, a deputy inspector general, and a staff. They would also need money to be able to contract out some investigative services and things like that. But roughly about $1 million a year. I think on the high end, it was about 1.2 million, which I think is a really good deal. I mean, when you're talking about more like a $6 billion budget, $1 million a year to bring peace of mind to people that we have a way to look into allegations of fraud and abuse and misconduct and whatnot. Also, it has the potential to save the state money if there are findings that indicate that money is being wasted, and we can put an end to that waste. So I feel like it would pay for itself. And even if it didn't financially pay for itself in terms of money saved, it certainly is a worthy investment for my main concern, which is bringing people a greater sense of trust in their public institutions. Because we can't survive without many of our public institutions, but we can't. If we don't have faith and trust in them, then we are really in a sad place indeed. And I just feel like that amount of money is more than worth being able to bring faith back to our public institutions. And I want to add that it's not always going to be, sometimes they're going to, an inspector general's office will hopefully have enough staff to look into all kinds of, allegations and concerns that are brought up. And actually, Inspector Street can tell me if this has ever happened. And sometimes they're going to find things wrong and they're going to bring that out into the public, or they'll turn it over to the DOJ if it's criminal or what have you. But I would think there'll be times where their findings might actually be reassuring to the public. There might be a concern that then, but the public isn't going to believe that, oh, indeed, there was nothing wrong done here if it's coming from a source they see as being biased. So I like the idea that the inspector general not only can bring to light bad actors and bad actions, but also could exonerate, if you will, perhaps when things were not wrong, but were perhaps perceived to be such. I wouldn't mind hearing whether that ever happens, and what your thoughts are on that. But I'm not the moderator, but if the moderator would allow the inspector to share.
And do you mind if I jump in? That was one of, I almost said your dad, my apologies. Representative Kowalko, that was one of the things that he and I discussed was, Inspector General Street kind of gave the right example. The airline tickets alone was a $1 million fine, right? I mean, that pays for itself if you're quantifying exactly what it is. So we would make the assumption that it would pay for itself. Now, I like to look at both sides of it, and I don't think every fiscal note is going to be accurate either. But I think it's very rare that you find an office that can pay for itself through the work that it does. That's generally never going to be the case. So this is a great argument in order to do so. And I think I've been on many different task forces in my short tenure, from contracts to potentially splitting up the HSS and what that may look like and everything else. And I think between the contracts that we do, the process that we go through in the state of Delaware, the people that are involved, just, you know, the amount of legislators or others who get their family members jobs or jobs themselves after the fact and using that, like, I think there has to be that pathway for the public to at least have trust in what they're doing. And I think now more than ever, that's dissipating on a rapid level amongst how the public feels about the work that we are doing. So I think, you know, that within itself, to Senator Sturgeon's point, will pay for itself, but it also has the benefit of making the public, I think, feel better about the work that's being done there, and that they have an equal opportunity to contracts and other work like everybody else that's receiving that benefit.
Yes, thank you for that. And both of your comments, I think, bring up that important concept of public trust, you know, public trust in their government, public trust in their institutions, and independent oversight is so much about that public trust. Going over to Ms. Johnson, you know, you're somebody who deals every day, you know, with the issues that we see in this state. I mean, we've seen news reports about corruptions and scandals. And, you know, especially from somebody with your perspective who deals with issues that affect underserved communities as well, you know, what effect have current forms of oversight had in Delaware? And, you know, what would an IG be able to bring into this? And related to both of those is, what kind of public support do you see for both our current oversight as well as the need for more oversight? Because I think you're probably somebody who deals with people who have an opinion on this on a regular basis, because you know, they're dealing with these types of issues that need more oversight. And so what kind of public support and you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there was a lot of questions in that. But I would say that a lot of the people that I speak to, they don't have faith in public institutions. I got a call this morning from someone who is very upset about something that I've reported on, but she feels like nothing is being done, and she isn't hearing anything back from officials, whether it is the Department of Justice, and it's a police case. And we know how Leobor protects the law enforcement institution. So we have people who are left in the dark, and I had to explain, I have no further information either. As a journalist, I only have the powers that any other, you know, member of the public has. So when it comes to trying to ferret out information, yes, we do try to employ FOIA, but we can't rely on that. We can't rely on that because there are so many exemptions. Our lawmakers have made so many exemptions so that basically they've written themselves out of being held accountable and in trying to you know, have access to documentation to show the public what someone is doing, what decisions were made, and that is the reason why their lives are being impacted the way that they are. And it is very frustrating. It is very frustrating. I believe that it is done on purpose to discourage people to give up, to discourage journalists to give up, to keep us from investigating and writing the story. So it impacts people every day. Again, I received another call. I don't know why today was the day that it was, but I received another call from someone from another state who said that they found out they had a criminal charge or a criminal history here in Delaware that they didn't remember or didn't know about from long ago. They found my story, you know, and in that story, I remember something that just, you know, just boggled my mind is that we have researchers, you know, trying to do the work, trying to provide answers to the public, but they have to do it independent of our government agencies, the same as us. When it comes to talking about people, you know, who've been involved in the criminal justice system, when it comes to talking about the affordable housing crisis, we can't even get numbers, data on that because the laws in this state protect government agencies and access to data and information. And researchers cannot get the information so that they can make, you know, any kind of educated theoretical opinion about what's happening. So again, yes, it does frustrate our efforts as journalists. And I would like to see that another layer of investigation be added to the mix as far as the Office of Inspector General. And I appreciate Don Peterson asking the question, what is the distinction between the Office of the Inspector General and the state auditor, because we are all very familiar with what happened with the previous state auditor. So that is a question that I would like to know as well. If someone could please give us an answer on that.
And that is going to be the next topic of discussion. Before we get there, though, I want to go to Ms. Bucic, and hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Correct me if I'm not, though. And a similar question to what I asked Ms. Johnson. You know, as you know, dealing with these lead issues, what kind of oversight have you seen the state perform? You know, have you seen, I think we've had several people now bring up in the comments the state auditor and the Attorney General's office. And so have they been involved in this issue? Do they offer oversight for these type of topics? And, you know, if so, what type of oversight have they offered? And if not, what type of oversight would you like to see that an Inspector General could fill?
Thanks for the question. So regarding the work we've done on lead poisoning, from my experience, there is no oversight. And the only forms of oversight are the ones we have forced them to do. You know, we're not asking for changes. We're asking for them to carry out things the way that they are supposed to be carried out. For example, with the school testing in the water, we were asking them to follow the EPA. And, you know, we had to build a coalition and go to the EPA and get the EPA involved. And it's really something that, you know, is not a normal thing to have to ask citizenry to do. You know, it's really above and beyond. Yeah, so we have reached out. We've reached out to the Attorney General's office, mostly in regards to FOIA and in regards to meeting minutes. We really haven't had a whole lot of response though, and from that angle. And the more we delay reform, it's really tremendous. You know, citizens can't create the amount of change that is required to move this. Dr. Rowe and I have been working on this for 8 years. And like Anitra said, you know, a lot of these systems are really created, in my opinion, to wear people down and get them to, you know, burn out and just give up. I feel it all the time. And I feel like there's just so many obstacles put in place. Just every single thing, is an obstacle. And it feels, at some point, it really does start to feel intentional. So it's not reasonable to require citizens to do this kind of work. And as we delay things, it wears down everybody's resolve, and children continue to be exposed. So all the measures to delay allow for children to continue to be exposed to lead. So all these things are just delaying and putting more time in place and just allowing the problem to continue rather than just admitting it and trying to start solving it. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you did. And let me speak on behalf of all Delawareans for the fact that please continue doing what you're doing and don't.
Absolutely. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah. And these are important topics. And I think, that is why we need an inspector general, because it should not be on the citizenry to have to do it all. Obviously citizens have a place in a well-functioning democracy, but citizens should be assisted by their government, especially when holding the government accountable. The governments they're complex, they're large, right? No individual has the ability to sort of handle that. I do want to circle back to Mr. Street though, because I want to deal with that topic of what is this interaction between the inspector general and other agencies that exist in a state. I believe every state has a state auditor. I think every state has an ethics body too, some kind of ethics commission or committee. And most states have an inspector general as well. And obviously every state has an attorney general. So in states that have an inspector general, this concern about overlap or duplication of efforts or whatnot, that's going to exist in every state that has an inspector general. And so how what could you maybe talk about how that interaction plays out in places that have these bodies, and what are some of either the the pitfalls or the positives for having sort of this overlap?
That's a great question, John. First of all, let me say that in the state of Louisiana, the way we're set up here, my office has jurisdiction over the attorney general. We have jurisdiction over the governor, the lieutenant governor, the state treasurer, the Department of Insurance, essentially all the governor's cabinet level agencies, all of the public colleges and universities, all of the boards and commissions, of which we have entirely too many here in Louisiana, but that's a separate discussion. And anybody that does business with any of those entities in the form of a contract or a grant. So now the good thing, and I came from the Attorney General's office into this job 15 years ago. I still know a lot of the people there, and that has allowed me to have good working relationships with the Attorney General. That is, I'll tell you, this is around the country. Every time we've seen this, it's usually the Attorney General standing in the way of an effective IG's office getting created. And a lot of it is that it's almost a territorial thing. They feel like, hey, that's our job. But, there's a big difference. And that is that the Attorney General has to run for re-election every 4 years. And the political angle is just impossible to escape as it relates to an Attorney General. Now, having said that, we have worked with the Attorney General here in Louisiana through multiple administrations and had success working cases together. We've also had to investigate them a couple of times, which has been, that's how you find out as an Inspector General whether you really want to do the job or not. Because it can be very difficult when you get those complaints on the governor, for instance, because I can tell you there's not a governor in all 50 states that doesn't have a staff that runs around 24/7 with their hair on fire. That's just the way it is. It's the nature of the business. You have various personalities, but they are very concerned, obviously, with the 24-hour news cycle. And the Inspector General, if they're doing their job right, is going to be way outside of that news cycle because it takes time to gather the facts and to get them right. And one point that you brought up, I think it was Representative Smith brought up earlier, or maybe Senator Sturgeon, both of you brought it up. I can tell you that most IGs, we have a duty to the truth, whatever it is. And if the truth shows that somebody didn't do something wrong, then we're absolutely going to say that. And one of the things that we have here is statutory confidentiality. Now, I know that there's been some discussion about FOIA and transparency and all those things, but the confidentiality angle actually allows us to do two things. One is to protect those who are falsely accused from having false allegations republished in a public environment. The second thing is that it protects the identity of whistleblowers, and you've got to create a situation where public employees feel comfortable that if they come forward, that their IDs or identification is going to be protected, or that their identity will be protected until the time, if there's an actionable case, they may have to be identified at that point, and you explain that all to them up front. But John, back to your original point, we work with all kinds of agencies in cooperation. For instance, the Department of Education has been tremendously helpful to us in terms of investigating this grant fraud for the nutrition grants, because the money goes through them from the feds. And so they've been helpful getting information and all of that. Those cooperative relationships are important. What you need is an IG staff that is experienced enough to know the difference and to understand that, hey, there's sometimes when you work with people and there's sometimes where you have to, do your job as an investigator to gather the facts. Louisiana, with the redundancy issue, what you describe as overlapping that was the first effort to shut my office down. And when I tell you shut it down, I mean that the Appropriations Committee introduced an amendment to zero out our budget. They reduced a $2 million budget down to zero. Okay. And without even a polite phone call to me. And so, and the public argument that was made at the time was the Inspector General is redundant with the Attorney General, they're redundant with the state police, and they're redundant with our legislative auditor, which I can tell you now, all these years later, that the motive for that zero amendment had nothing to do with redundancy. It had to do with them being upset that I was investigating a statewide official that they were all friends with, and that's the nature of our business. But in terms of the redundancy argument, we've been very careful here to carve out our own niche, which is, and if you create an effective Inspector General, they're not going to be redundant with the auditor, even though they may have an audit function. They're not going to be redundant with other investigative agencies. And the single thing that's going to single them out is their independence. They're going to be independent in a way that no other agency in state government. And I'm going to trust Representative Smith and Senator Sturgeon and any of you others that are familiar with the political makeup of Delaware to clarify that. But somebody that's got to run for re-election every 4 years is not in the same position. The IG is in a spot where they're going to wade into the toxic cases that no one else will touch, essentially for political reasons. And certainly the ones that elected officials run from, because they're guaranteed to infuriate people, because sometimes the cases hit and you've got folks on both sides of it, and no matter where you land, you're going to upset folks. It's just the way it is. And so the IG is there with those protections to be able to wade in and do that job that no one else in state government is in a position to do. So there's a lot of different topics here. And one last thing before I turn it back over, the issue of cost, I can tell you for a fact that the IG will not only pay for itself, if the person that's in there is doing the job right, it will put money back into the state coffers at a level that you have not even considered. I think in 15 years, our largest amount was $17 million compared to a roughly $2 million budget. But we had, as I'd mentioned in the chat, a case that resolved in January, massive student loan fraud, where a person was put in jail for 11 years, an 11-year federal prison sentence, and a $2.8 million restitution order, which is $500,000 more than our annual appropriation in one case. So those are the kind of things that it absolutely will pay for itself. That's been proven everywhere that an IG has been put in place. As long as it's done right and you get good, competent people running it, it will pay for itself over and over again.
Thank you so much. And maybe going to Senator Sturgeon then, what would the impact of an independent, unelected inspector general have? We've heard about some of the issues, we've heard about some of the, lack of oversight of the legislature, of the AG's office. So what role do would a IG be playing in Delaware, and what would be needed to make it the most effective?
More issues, potential cases of abuse, fraud, etc., would actually be investigated and would result in some type of a finding that would be published. It would result at times in prosecutions, because something that our DOJ, I'm very happy to announce that our Attorney General's office and Department of Justice are not, at least at this time, inoperative to the creation of an IG's office. They've been very cooperative. They've offered a few suggestions, but nothing that takes away the power from the IG's office at all. And they just simply ask that if a criminal finding results from investigation by the IG, it is turned over to them for further investigation and potentially prosecution. So I would think that we wouldn't have to rely strictly on citizen groups or on the legislature to try to oversee areas of concern. And on a monthly basis, I have constituents bring very alarming reports to me that I personally cannot fully chase down. I can ask questions. I can go to the various, I can go to oversee agencies that provide oversight. And sometimes I'm able to get answers, but other times I'm not. Other times I'm just sort of like, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. And I think to myself, this is when I wish I had an AG's office. Because we don't, just like citizens groups can't chase down every single lead they hear about. Journalists can't chase down every single lead or even get the information, right? Because they could get turned down. They could be like, sorry, this doesn't, or just run you through the ringer. So you have to, as somebody said, you just get worn down until you give up. Legislators don't have time to hold hearings and about every concern that's raised. So a lot of stuff slips between the cracks. So I see an IG's office as being one that would be able to pursue many of these complaints that we hear about, many more than what we are able to do, what we collectively can do now in our state, and hopefully find some things. So that's my hope for an IG's office, is that they would actually be able to investigate and find the truth. And like I mentioned earlier, and like Inspector Street said, sometimes the truth might be that nothing wrong was done. But that's important to know too, because that also restores faith, right? It restores faith in our institutions if we know that someone we can trust, someone who is independent, nonpartisan, not beholden to anyone whatsoever, says, yes, here's been a problem and here are some recommendations of how it can be fixed, because they can make recommendations, or who says, no, we found no evidence of wrongdoing. Either way, it helps build trust.
Thank you. And going over to Representative Smith, I wonder if you could also tell us a little bit about both how an Inspector General's office would stay independent in Delaware, as well as commenting on that issue of, duplication of efforts, since that was a topic that was brought up last year with that bill. And so, yeah, on both those issues.
Yeah, I'll start with the duplication of efforts. That was one thing that we tried to work on in the House amendment to delineate that, but also create an MOU between the Attorney General's office, Inspector General's office, and the Auditor's office. I'd also like to remind everyone, to Senator Sturgeon's point as well, while the General Assembly can certainly look at a lot of different things, we're also not in session all the time. So we can't necessarily be ready to do all of those things. If you remember, I think it was myself and Representative Wilson Anton, we were going to put a resolution on the floor when we went into special session about the auditor at the time, because I was maintaining on this most simplest form, if you're a leader, you need to step down while we do go through due process, right? So those were some of the arguments. Again, we have added a lot of those information about subpoena power. The Inspector General would have authority all over government agencies. So those do include, you know, the University of Delaware, Del State, and all the different departments within state government. Those are some of the things, but yeah, I mean, that was the whole point of Representative Kowalko and I doing the House Amendment 1, because that was really the only thing we really got back last year in terms of negative feedback from the speaker and a few others was, hey, you know, this is just a duplication of efforts. But there's many situations, as we know, where, you know, have nothing to do with one or the other, or you know, to Sarah's point, she's been as a regular citizen acting as the Inspector General on lead here in the state of Delaware. It was her and Dr. Rowe, Amy, who have really been bringing a lot of these things to light through FOIA and other things, and it's because they know how to handle the government and the process, but the regular person does not. So that just offers some of that, and my apologies on what the first part of that question was.
It was how the office would stay independent.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, again, I think there was two lines of thinking there, right? And I think it goes with a lot of the things that we do in government. Either like the Inspector General Street mentioned, you have the government or the governor recommends someone, it then goes for the vote. Or I was also looking at the alternative path of like the whole like independent commission comes up with it. I'm definitely kind of against the independent commission part of it now that I've seen independent groups work on the whole task force side of the house when it comes to policy making and making decisions. I can't tell you guys how many times I've been assigned to a task force and I automatically know it's going to be a waste of time when I show up and I see not a General Assembly member who's a co-chair, but someone from the general public who is a co-chair. And I know they're just there to either squash it or something else. And so it's disheartening off the bat. If I'm a legislator and know that, that's something, it's a shame that the general public doesn't. So I think what Inspector General Street mentioned was kind of the right way to go and how we were trying to go about doing that as well.
Thank you.
Can I just add that the reason the way we maintain independence, I think, is by making sure it is an appointed rather than elected position. The process by which Inspector General will be appointed is spelled out in the bill, and it requires a committee to come up with 3 names. The committee is completely bipartisan and has quite a few people on it. They have to agree on 3 names that they then pass up to the governor. The governor chooses one. Then they have to still be confirmed by the Senate. That's a lot of layers to make sure that the person is a high quality, highly trusted individual. They're independent because they don't have to please anyone, because they don't have to worry about re-election. Their term has to be longer than any governor's term. So I think in our bill, it's a 5-year term, since our governor's terms are 4 years. So, you know, they don't have to worry about the governor, you know, that they owe something to the governor that appointed them. Again, they only got appointed because their name was given by a group. It's like you're creating a system where they really don't owe anybody anything. And they cannot out as Sue's appointed, and we would have loved to have included language that would prevent them from running for office right after leaving the position of Inspector General. But unfortunately, that conflicted with, I believe, and this is where Debbie could help me, our drafting attorney. We have certain laws in our Constitution about, we have language in our Constitution about who is eligible to run for office and who isn't. And so we would have to do a constitutional amendment to like say someone is not eligible to run for office just because they used to be in a inspector general. So on that side, we could only say that if they run for office, they automatically would no longer be considered the inspector general. They either have to resign or they are resigned by virtue of having filed to run for office. But at least we can put in that nobody who previously held elected office or even held a high-level cabinet position or director position can be an inspector general. And the only exception we carved out was for deputy attorney generals because we want prosecutors. They're the ideal people for those roles, our prosecutors. They would know how to go about doing the job of inspector general. So it's basically, these are people who are not, who by design are not beholden to anyone and therefore can be independent and unbiased.
And Senator Sturgeon is correct. We would need a constitutional amendment in order to change that and add that to the bill, barring, an inspector general from running for office. One of the points we got last year where they were trying to compare this to cabinet secretaries. And I think the process that Senator Sturgeon just laid out and that is put in the bill shows the exact difference between that and a cabinet secretary. There aren't those extra layers to go through. So it really is going to have checks and balances within the process of choosing that person that allows for more public debate in that process as well. So I don't know. I'm looking forward to at least having a good public debate this time on the issue, because I do think when you asked the original question to circle back on what happened last year, I don't think we were really given the. I would love to at least get it on the floor this time. Any good policy, you want to keep getting it down the road, and I want my colleagues to have to say yes or no to if they think that we need to stop waste, fraud, and abuse in Delaware, and I think that's a fair argument to make.
Well, thank you. Yes, and I believe the last time that we did have a vote on the inspector general bill was, I think, in 2007, and I believe at that point the bill passed the House unanimously. There was no objections to it at that point, and so I think if this gets to the House, I think like how we saw with the committee hearing last year, it's going to get passed out. Of anybody that it's in, it's going to get passed out of. I'd love to go over to Ms. Bucic right now to ask, given everything you've heard about what an inspector general would look like tonight, do you think that this would be effective? Do you think that this would have a significant impact on some of these environmental issues, and in particular on the issue of lead poisoning?
Absolutely. Having an inspector general would place the responsibility on the state for correcting, their own missteps and misstatements and misuse of funds. As I said earlier, advocates can't do everything, and the costs for not performing all this stuff are really high. We know that lead poisoning, for every case that they find, there's all kinds of cost savings where it's special education. I mean, it's linked to all kinds of costs to society, there's links to incarceration. Just listening to the discussion about costs, this would be a perfect issue where if you could invest in prevention, you would get so much back. So I think it would be incredibly effective. We talk about, the Delaware way, and we're all really, it's a small state, and, there's advantages to that. But I think having an independent person who looked over these issues would be incredibly useful. Absolutely.
And in terms of that cost, I mean, have you been seeing numbers when dealing with this lead issue to sort of put into context what $1 million sort of means? Because I'm speculating, but I would assume that we're spending a lot more on that, just dealing with issues with the environment and dealing with issues with lead. But, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so for every dollar that's invested in lead poisoning prevention, you get back money in the future. You get back like $17 in the future. If you find a child that has lead poisoning, their lifetime earnings can be like over $1 million greater. When the state, when we first looked at the water testing, that was like a $300,000 grant, $200,000 to $300,000. Because it wasn't done properly, the state then came back and, put nearly $2 million into it. So because this original $300,000 wasn't spent properly and things didn't go, as they should have, because of all the wonderful reporting, that people wanted action. And so the state, puts this money, and that's great. But, it would be better to use the original funds and use them properly than to, do these kind of one-time budget things. Delaware is the only state that doesn't fund its own lead program. Us in West Virginia, we're the only states on the East Coast. So we haven't been putting money into this issue for years. So, yeah, $1 million is nothing, because I'm sure they could uncover so many things that,
Right.
would make that money back.
And how long, to the best of your knowledge, because obviously there's some info that this is why we need an IG, because we don't have all the information, but how long have these issues that you and Dr. Rowe have been dealing with, the recent issues about the lead in schools, how long have those issues been going on that people in the government knew about it, but the public did not know about it?
Well, Dr. Rowe and I found out about the water last summer. That was, I guess we found out in September. The results were posted in June, but some of those water samples were taken, half year to a year prior. So, there was, we had actually Dr. Rowe and I worked on a bill last year where we were, working on something with the lead program. We were asking them to do something, and there was a lot of information being said. And at that time, I think back to that hearing, they knew about the water results then, and so I think it's kind of like just one of those things. It's a systems failure, I think, I think there's a lot of things like this that are going on, but it's something, that just isn't rising to the level of, unless people really, make it come to the surface. So as far as for the water, across the country, every state got this type of money, but our water had never been tested before this. I can tell you that wasn't like a routine thing, that we were not testing the water in public schools, and that was similar to places throughout the country.
Thank you. I want to go to Ms. Johnson with a similar question of, do you think that the Inspector General that's been discussed today, and would that be effective in addressing some of the issues that you've been seeing? And also, as a follow-up to that, what are some of the issues that you think that an Inspector General would need to look at? I think obviously this lead issue is one of them, but what are some of the other issues that you see from your unique perspective of dealing with people who often don't get the type of, government assistance and government oversight that they need? What are some of the things that we can highlight for when this bill eventually becomes law? Because I think this is a matter of when and not if. And so, as we transition into sort of the call to action that I'll make at the end of this, what are some of the topics that we should be thinking about that are most important to deal with?
Well, I can give you an example of how Delaware Online and News Journal would be helped in the job that we do, help the public, help inform the public about what's going on. About 3 years ago, the EPA's Inspector General published a report that said that the EPA was wrong in not having public hearings and notifying the public about a chemical that leaked out of a Croda industrial plant. And this chemical is 30 times more dangerous than scientists have previously thought, and causing cancer in adults. So it's something that the EPA did not do. It's something that citizens in Delaware did not have the information were it not for the Inspector General's report. Getting that information, and then our journalists were able to report that out and go to citizen groups who are advocating for environmental justice. And it's situations like that are needed. We could work in tandem, because again, as journalists, we don't have the compulsory power, to try to get any public official to provide us documentation or information that they really don't want to provide. So along with environmental injustice, it's a laundry list. And at the top of that is law enforcement and criminal justice system. We could do a whole nother panel discussion on, the concerns that are there. And because of all of the laws in the state protecting law enforcement and the system that has been created to keep that industry going. And the abuses that incarcerated people face. There is the issue of just, like I said, home ownership. The fact that we have affordable housing crisis and housing and homeless advocates found that just in 2021 alone, 35% jump in homelessness is experienced by families. We're talking about mothers and children. But that crisis didn't just happen in a vacuum. There were policies put in place that helped usher that along. And we don't know what we don't know. We don't have access to a lot of the data. And an inspector general would be able to go in and look at the disparate entities that were involved in contributing to the crisis that is. So there are a number of issues, a number of topics, a number of things of concern that people reach out to me and ask me to investigate. And I'm just one reporter. There are other reporters, there's a small team of us. But again, we are constrained by, basically, we only have the power that any other member of the public does.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I'm glad that you brought up law enforcement too, because one of the questions we had gotten was about how this office would operate with the protections that the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights has. And I think you get to the point that this is an office that would have access to this type of information, even when reporters don't. And so we would still be able to have investigations that can deal with that, when currently there's really nobody that's, and no agency that's creating this kind of oversight and looking at these issues. Representative Smith, you would like to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Just to that, because of how agency is defined, it would cover state police, but is exempt county and municipal governments. So it would need a different vote threshold, meaning supermajority, to apply to municipalities and things like that. I just wanted to add that for clarification purposes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I think that goes to the fact that, if this bill gets passed in its current form this year, then we will still have more work to do. One question, I want to switch over to some of the questions that we've been getting in the comments. I've tried to incorporate a few of them already. I know one question that we got earlier was when this bill would be introduced in Delaware this year. Senator Sturgeon, do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, so I think we have the bill in a really good place. I don't know if you can ever get a bill perfect where everyone's going to say, yeah, hey, we love this. And if I waited till that point, I would never get it introduced. So I want to get it introduced before the end of session, before June 30th. I really want to have a conversation now that it is where it is in terms of being what I consider to be really good. I want to make sure Representative Smith has a chance to look it over, share it with like his, trusted confidants on his side. I want to share it with my leadership. And I want to start talking about, I need to start vote counting. I need to start persuading the members of my own caucus to support the bill. And I'm hoping that my leadership will help me do that. This is a pretty big deal. It's creating a whole new agency. So this is one of those bills that like a sole legislator, especially still a relatively new one like myself, isn't going to be able to get through if it isn't clear that I have like the full support of the Senate President Pro Tem, for example, who I'm pretty sure will support it because I think he was the prime sponsor on an earlier version. But I just need to have those conversations, that share the bill with them and say, okay, now we got to take it to our caucus. Mike can probably speak more about the Republican caucus, but it seems that they would be inclined to support. And I think I have a number of members of the Senate Democratic Caucus who have expressed great interest and actual enthusiasm and excitement about this bill. So I do think I have a lot of support, but that doesn't mean I have unanimous support. And sometimes if you have a strong opponent, and they speak up, they can be persuasive and they can start to erode some of the support. So I really haven't had those really deep conversations yet to sense, how easy is it going to be to pass through the Senate. I think in the end I can get it there, but like I said, it would be easier to know that like my majority leader, my whip are going to stand behind me and send a message, and then I think everyone will come around. So I don't know. I would say I would like to introduce it by mid-May, towards the end of May, so we could get it through a committee hearing and a vote on the floor and get it over to the House. The good thing is this General Assembly lasts for another whole year. So if for some reason it doesn't make it through the whole process by June 30th, it's still alive and we can work on it in January of 2020.
Yeah, I would say my main goal is to get it on the floor in the House. So I think that's going to be my biggest obstacle. But I think we'll have a lot of proponents. I'm not going to speak for my whole caucus, but everyone was pretty excited about it when I was going to offer an alternative version of the same exact thing, really, right? And it wasn't going to be that much different. This bill isn't going to be that much different, only slight subtleties from the bill that you've seen previously. So I think everybody should rally around the same thing. And I would expect a lot of people to jump up and support and start pushing for it once we maybe, gin up the advocacy groups like yourselves and others that can help push people within their own districts that might be on the fence when we have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I forget who it was. I believe it was, it was one of the leaders of the Republican House caucus last year who in the committee meeting said that this was one of the best bills he had seen. And the Speaker of the House, Pete Schwarzkopf, he also said that he was very happy with this bill, that it would provide oversight from an unelected official, because right now we do have several elected officials, but that important of having that non-politicized office is so important. And I think especially in a state like ours. And so I'm so glad to see that kind of bipartisan support for it. In terms of the other questions that we've gotten, one of the questions that we got was how would whistleblowers be protected under this? So I don't know if Senator Sturgeon or Representative Smith has an answer for that based on the current bill, or if we should maybe ask Mr. Street about how whistleblowers are protected by AG's offices. But if any of you would like to give that a chance.
I mean, I can just say it's in the bill that they have to remain anonymous unless, there's some exceptions where they may need to be identified at some point, like obviously if finding goes to the Attorney General and it ends up getting prosecuted, and then whistleblowers may need to testify. But I could not place my finger right on the line that says that. So if somebody else, including my phone a friend, the drafting attorney, wants to quickly text me, or if Representative Smith knows, we definitely speak to the issue of protecting whistleblowers in the bill.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to find it right now, but it definitely anonymity, except for like a very few exclusions. So.
Oh, my phone a friend came through. Sorry to interrupt you, Representative. Lines 157 to 158. Thank you so much. By the way, my phone a friend is Debbie Gottschalk, who is, speaking of a nonpartisan, non-biased attorney for the General Assembly. She works for all of us, Senate, House, Republicans, and Democrats. So on those lines, we specifically say, since I'm looking at the bill, I will go ahead and read it. The Inspector General shall treat all matters under investigation as confidential, including the identity of any person who files a complaint or provides information regarding an investigation, except as far as necessary to perform the duties of the Inspector General and to be recommending from an investigation.
Thank you. Yes, and that is important. Obviously, you know, we live in a small state, and so having those types of protections are important. I know that we're already past our time a little bit. We were supposed to end at 8:30. We're obviously going to go a little bit longer. Before we end, though, I would like to give everyone an opportunity to just sort of speak for, 2-3 minutes, about anything that you think we may have missed in this conversation. We had I think a great discussion. I think this discussion could have been a full day conference, and we could have talked about so many more topics. And so I'm glad that we at least got sort of an introduction to this information. But starting with Representative Smith, if you would like to maybe just, anything that you think we may have missed or that we should be thinking of as we leave this conversation.
I don't think that we missed. I think Senator Sturgeon briefly touched on it, but I think this go around we have like the Office of the Auditor behind us in terms of this effort. And I think we generally don't. So, last time that was one of the big things hanging over our head, and we don't have that anymore. We have support. And so when it's either going to be forming the MOU later or the delineation point in terms of the arguments that will be happening in committee and elsewhere, having them on our side and in a unified partnership is going to be really important. And so I think that's the one focus I'll have. I would just say to start contacting your legislators as soon as it's dropped and say, hey, this is something that we need to start focusing on. I would start using examples from our state and other states. For me, right, I'm always looking for things that are specific examples in my area, but our state is the most important thing. So, add that. I think, Sarah adds valuable information and experience from what she's going through right now. So that's a very good example. And I think there's many others. So I would just try to personalize those things as much as possible and speak to the need for over the years of why this is, coming way far down the road from when we actually needed it and how much more we don't want to miss in the process.
Thank you. And Senator Sturgeon, do you have any sort of final thoughts, anything we may have missed or what we should be doing?
I think Representative Smith hit the nail on the head in terms of asking all of you to reach out to your local elected officials, letting them know of your support for this. And then, keep an eye out for if this gets a committee hearing. We'd love to have you all testify in favor of the bill, things like that. We're going to need that. He is a little more sanguine than I am regarding the auditor's support. The auditor of accounts currently, I did meet with their office and they had some concerns, but I hope that we can work through them. We will certainly try.
Great. And Ms. Bucic, would you like to give us sort of, a little closing statement, anything we may have missed or anything we should be keeping in mind as we go?
No, it's just, this is great. So you had asked earlier about the Attorney General. And I'm just thinking, throughout this whole process, this is the first time we had this massive round of water testing in our schools. And our school nurses have had a requirement by the law to get every child's lead level when they get registered for school since 1995, since the original Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Act. Just this past January, school nurses have now been denied this. And when we contacted the Attorney General, they told us it was attorney-client privilege, that nurses can no longer get the required data by law because of HIPAA, even though they're registered nurses for the state. And the Attorney General said they can't even tell us why this is happening because of attorney-client privilege. This is the kind of thing that an Inspector General could work on. I don't expect it to perform, miracles or be perfect, but there needs to be another person out there, because Dr. Rowe and I are like trying to use all of the avenues possible. And when you go to the Attorney General and they say attorney-client privilege, that's why a nurse can't get something that they need to get for a child to enter school. The timing is very bizarre. The first time we have these water samples, now the nurses can no longer see if kids have been tested. I find it very, very bizarre. So I think an Inspector General, this is a case where they could, go in and really see what exactly is going on. That's my closing statement. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. And Mr. Street, would you like to give us a sort of a closing thoughts? And maybe you can even address what Ms. Bucic just said very briefly too. But any closing thoughts about anything that you think we may have missed as well in this discussion that that we should keep in mind as we make this a reality in Delaware?
Thank you, John. I want to apologize that for whatever reason my video stopped working, but I'm hoping you guys can still hear me. Let me just commend you for this. It takes real effort to get an Inspector General's office created, and I will say this. If I had to pass the statute that supports my office now in today's political environment, I'm not sure we could get it done. I think it would be a real challenge. We got that done in the wake of a massive public corruption scandal, and that's almost always what it takes. I would encourage all of you guys to engage your constituents. It's public support that's going to drive this more than anything else. But we talked, every now and then you're going to there's a natural resistance to effective oversight. It's just going to be there no matter what you do. And so, you have to, you want to empower the Inspector General to cut through that stuff, but also you want to make sure that the IG can be held accountable as well. And we've had it as in every profession, you occasionally will get an IG that will need to resign because they're not doing the job correctly, or maybe there's an ethics violation or what have you. But you want to make sure that the IG has the tools to deal with the sort of natural pushback and retaliatory things that are going to happen. Because when the office is first created, you call that the honeymoon, and everybody's there. Oh yeah, we all support the IG, until they start doing an investigation that gets up in the middle of some people's business that they would rather not have it there. And so and that's just the natural. That's not unique to Delaware or to Louisiana or to any place else. We've seen it over and over and over again, pretty much everywhere we go. So my strongest encouragement is for, first of all, Senator Sturgeon and Representative Smith in your respective bodies. You guys are doing a great job, obviously, of pushing this. But information is power, and I think if you are able to, beyond this public forum, speak to civic groups, to the extent that the media has an interest in this. Speak to the press and let them know why this is needed. And because I think the track record across the country is that when you create these offices, they can make an incredible positive difference. And I know that that's happened in my own home state, even though I'm still busy working corruption cases all of the time. But I know that from ordinary citizens that come up to me and they'll say, listen, we're so glad that you're here, that you're doing this stuff. Not everybody feels that way about me, obviously, and the office, but I think that the people who are looking for good government are our biggest cheerleaders. And so I'll close with that and just applaud you guys, and also offer any and all assistance that you guys could possibly need. I know that our government relations committee with AIG is still very involved, and our new president, Will Fletcher, is extremely supportive of what you guys are doing. And so we're happy to help in any way that we can if you guys need it.
Real quick, John, if you don't mind, IG Street, we'd, I think, definitely love to have you ready to go as an expert witness when we need to answer specific questions on the application of what we're trying to do. So since you said that, I am going to probably take you up on that at some point.
Absolutely. We're happy to do it.
Wonderful. And these kind of connections are great. You know, last year we had our discussion on the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. And in case anyone's missed it, Misty Siemens has been writing, she was one of our panelists last year, and she's been writing, I think she's done 4 out of the 5 parts in a series on Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, why it needs to be reformed in Delaware, which is something that DelCOG supports. And so as we wrap up, I want to finish with Ms. Johnson, any closing thoughts you have about anything we may have missed about the topic of an inspector general, or about the topic of government oversight and government accountability in general, and what's needed in Delaware.
Yes, so they say that, or there's a saying that all politics is local. I think at this point, the public is not clamoring for more politics. The public wants accountability. And we need an inspector general who will be able to focus on delivering accountability from our elected officials and from those public bodies that are accepting taxpayer money or support, or in charge of public integrity. And as far as what is missing, I hope that the bill in its current form, that there will be a push also to consider that the accountability has to also lay at the feet of our local leaders as well, because that is where people are going to see the effects on their everyday life. And what happens in these small towns and unincorporated areas, your HOAs, your code enforcement, all of that affects people every day. And so we need oversight in those areas as well. And when you have Delaware's largest city being subject to, or its charter being subject to what the decisions of the General Assembly, then we need an inspector general who has the power to also go into municipalities and look at corruption and abuses there.
Yeah.
And finally, I will say that the inspector general should in no way feel that they are above inquiry themselves. As journalists, we're committed to looking at any aspect of government and delivering what we see, what we find to the people, so that they can make an informed choice and decision and know what's happening with anybody who's accepting taxpayer support.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's spot on. I mean, if we get a state AG created, that's going to be the first step. And like Ms. Johnson said, we need the same kind of oversight for our municipalities, as well as our courts, and as well as our state universities. there's no reason that these things cannot be under an inspector general, as Mr. Street mentioned earlier. A lot of those entities that may not be under an inspector general the first time that it's enacted in Delaware are already protected in other states, and they hopefully will be at one point in Delaware. And as Ms. Johnson mentioned as well, we'll also need to have oversight of the inspector general's office. That's a problem that we have currently with our auditor and with our AG's office, is that they're bodies that don't have any external oversight. And so we will be keeping working on this. The press, community organizing, those are essential aspects to, this process, and to both, making sure that the information that we get from the inspector general is used to help the public. We're almost 20 minutes past, and so I'm going to wrap it up. I apologize for going late, but we had a great discussion. I don't think there was anything that we could have possibly cut out of this. I think there's so much we could still add. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. I would highly recommend that everybody follow up with everything that Sarah and Amy Rowe have been working on in Lead-Free Delaware. I highly suggest everyone read all of Ms. Johnson's articles in the News Journal and Delaware Online. Please follow the work that Senator Sturgeon and Representative Smith are doing down there. They're both big open government advocates. They're doing a lot of important work, and we need to support them because, as they said, right, it is the community that these politicians listen to, that their fellow legislators listen to. And if we don't support them, they're not going to be able to get the work done that needs to be done for Delaware. And thank you so much to Mr. Street for being here. And thank you so much, Mr. Street, for your offer to be an expert in our committee hearings as well, too, because we need that. We need somebody who has experienced these kind of things and can explain to people who are hesitant in Delaware just how well it can work. And of course, thank you everyone who attended tonight and everyone that was able to stay for this whole entire time. We will be making a recording of this event available to online. So we'll be sending that out hopefully within the next week. I'll also send some information on our panelists and as well as all of our sponsors, because I also highly recommend that everyone reach out and see all the different things that the groups who sponsored this are doing. DelCOG is right now really focused on Inspector General, but we're always working on other FOIA issues. Delaware Press Association always has so many issues they're working on, and all of our other co-sponsors, Common Cause Delaware, Delaware Poor People's Campaigns, Delaware Public Preschool Coalition, the League of Women Voters of Newcastle County, Lead-Free Delaware, Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, Network Delaware, New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists, and Rise Delaware. All these groups are doing important work, and I hope that you will follow up with them and support their work as well. For next steps, in addition to supporting the work of all of our sponsors and panelists, I hope everyone will follow Representative Smith's advice. Reach out to all of your state senators, state representatives, reach out to the governor when this bill is introduced. Let everyone who has the ability to make a difference on this, reach out to the Attorney General and the state auditor. Let them know that you voted for him because you believe in this kind of oversight and you want them to support this as well too. Reach out to everyone who you have voted for and let them know that you voted for them because you want to see this kind of change in Delaware, this kind of reform, this kind of oversight in Delaware. We have a right to know whether our government is functioning correctly. We have a right to have trust in our public institutions, and an inspector general is needed for us to be able to do that. Together we can make that a reality, and I'm so thankful to everyone, and I'm so excited for getting this bill enacted. Thank you everyone for coming, and hopefully this will just be the start of this discussion.